On a freezing night when the temperature plunged to 30°C, the man thought he was alone, safe inside his remote cabin, until a desperate scratching shattered the silence. At first he thought it was just the wind, but then frantic claws against the door froze him in place. When he opened it, his heart nearly stopped. A trembling German shepherd stood there, her fur caked with ice, her eyes pleading for mercy. Two tiny puppies huddled at her side, shaking so violently they could barely stand. What he didn't know was that this dog hadn't just come for shelter, she had come with a purpose. And the choice he made that night would change everything, and reveal a truth no one expected. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The wind howled like a hungry beast, rattling the wooden walls of the small cabin buried deep in the wilderness. Snow piled high against the windows. Inside, the man sat alone in an old armchair, his broad shoulders hunched beneath the weight of silence. For weeks now, he had been living with nothing but the sound of the storm, the groan of the timbers, and his own thoughts echoing in his mind. He wasn't a stranger to solitude. Years ago, he had chosen this life away from crowded cities and their endless noise. The cabin, inherited from his late father, was meant to be a place of peace. But in the heart of winter, at 30 degrees below freezing, peace had turned into something else, something heavy, almost suffocating. Still, there were nights like this one. When the silence felt unbearable, he leaned back staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind batter the world outside. Loneliness gnawed at him sharper than the cold. He had grown used to relying on no one, but sometimes he wondered if he had made a mistake by cutting himself off so completely. The wilderness had its beauty, yes, but also its merciless cruelty. Because on that very night when the storm howled its fiercest, something unexpected would arrive at his door. And with it, his world, frozen in silence for so long, was about to shatter. The man stirred from his chair when a faint sound reached his ears, different from the moaning wind or creaking wood. At first he thought it was the storm playing tricks on him, but then it came again, a muffled scratching, sharp and insistent. His brow furrowed. Out here, miles from the nearest town, visitors were unthinkable. He moved slowly toward the frosted window, his boots crunching on the wooden floor. Through the icy glass, a shape emerged. At first, it was only a blur against the storm, but as he wiped the frost away with his sleeve, his breath caught in his throat. A German shepherd stood just beyond the window, its fur heavy with snow, eyes locked on his. The dog's paw pressed against the glass as if it were knocking. And then he saw them. Two small puppies huddled at its side, shivering violently in the bitter cold. The man froze. His first instinct was disbelief. How could they have survived out there in such temperatures? The mother's gaze was fierce yet pleading, a silent cry that cut deeper than words ever could. The puppies whined softly, their little bodies trembling as they pressed closer to her, desperate for warmth. Snowflakes clung to their fur like fragile crystals, making them look even more fragile, more desperate. The man's hand hovered near the window latch, his heart pounding. Letting them in meant warmth and safety, but it also meant risk. His food supplies were barely enough to last until the next thaw. Another mouth to feed was a burden. 3 mouths could mean starvation. Still, as he looked into the shepherd's eyes, he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, an ache for connection, for trust. The scratching grew more urgent, the dog's paw tapping harder, the puppy's cries rising with the storm. The man clenched his jaw, torn between survival and compassion. He had come here to escape the world, but now the world was pressing back, demanding a choice. And on that freezing night, staring into the desperate eyes of a German shepherd, his decision would mark the beginning of everything that followed. The man backed away from the window, his heart hammering in his chest. He paced the small cabin, running a rough hand across his beard as if the motion would help him think. Survival out here was a delicate balance. Every fire log, every slice of dried meat, every jar of preserved vegetables had already been calculated to last through the bitter cold months. Adding 3 hungry mouths could tip that balance into disaster. He glanced back toward the frosted glass. The German shepherd hadn't moved. She stood tall and unmoving, her paw still pressed to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The puppies, though, were weaker, shifting in restless shivers. One of them pawed at the snow, then pressed its nose against its mother's fur for comfort. His chest tightened at the sight. They were fighting a battle against the cold they couldn't win much longer. Logic told him to stay put, to protect what little he had. After all, wasn't that the reason he had chosen this life? Distance from people, from their endless needs and demands. Here in the wild, he answered only to himself, yet now, staring at those innocent faces, that philosophy seemed cold, even cruel. He could turn his back, yes, but he would hear their cries in his sleep for the rest of his life. The storm outside howled louder, as if nature itself were urging him to decide. His stomach churned with the weight of the choice. He pressed his hands against the table, bowing his head, torn between survival and mercy. Could he risk it? Could he shoulder the responsibility of saving them, knowing it might mean losing his own stability? Slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes drifting back to the shepherd's gaze. There was no malice there, only desperation and an unspoken plea. In that moment, the man realized this was not just about them. It was about him, too. His cabin wasn't only filled with silence. It was filled with emptiness. And perhaps these unexpected visitors had come to fill it. The man stood at the door, his hand hovering over the cold iron latch. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his mind racing with every reason not to do it. He imagined the food shelves growing emptier by the day, the firewood stack burning down too quickly, the long weeks of winter still ahead. But then he pictured those eyes, the German shepherd's unyielding stare filled with strength and sorrow, the tiny bodies of the puppies trembling and curling into the snow. His pulse thundered. He had no right to decide who deserved to live, yet the decision was his alone. With a sharp breath, he pulled the latch and swung the door open. A rush of icy wind burst inside, scattering embers from the fireplace. The shepherd hesitated for a moment, snow clinging to her fur before stepping forward cautiously. The puppies tumbled in beside her, their tiny paws leaving wet tracks across the floor. The man quickly shut the door, sealing the storm back outside. Instantly, the cabin felt different. Warmer somehow, though the temperature hadn't changed. The German shepherd shook herself, scattering snowflakes across the floorboards. Her eyes flicked around the cabin, cautious but grateful, before she nudged the puppies closer to the fire. They whimpered softly, curling up near the warmth with pitiful exhaustion. The man crouched nearby, studying them closely. Their ribs were faintly visible beneath their fur, and their legs trembled with weakness. His heart clenched. They hadn't just been wandering, they had been surviving. Barely. He reached for a small pot of stew he had set aside for his dinner. Hesitation flickered once more. This was meant to last him 2 days. But when the shepherd's gaze met his, steady and unblinking, he knew there was no going back. He ladled a portion into a bowl and placed it gently on the floor. The dogs ate quickly but not wildly, as if they understood this gift was precious. As the firelight danced across their fur, the man realized something he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, his cabin wasn't silent. It was alive. Night crept slowly over the frozen wilderness, the storm outside growing fiercer with each passing hour. Inside the cabin, the fire burned brighter, pushing back the icy breath of winter. The man sat in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the newcomers curled near the hearth. The puppies were already asleep, tiny chests rising and falling in quick, fragile rhythm. But the German shepherd was different. She remained awake, her head lifted, ears pricked toward every sound. She wasn't just resting, she was guarding. The man shifted uneasily. Though he had let them in, trust did not come easily. He couldn't shake the thought, where had they come from? Dogs did not simply appear in the middle of a deadly storm, especially not with young pups. Someone must have abandoned them. Or worse, someone could be searching for them, ready to knock on his door at any moment. The uncertainty gnawed at him as the flames hissed and cracked. At one point, the shepherd stood abruptly and padded to the door, her nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. She sniffed at the gap beneath it, her body stiffening. A low growl rumbled in her chest. The man's grip tightened on the armrests. His eyes darted to his hunting rifle propped against the wall. Out here, danger came in many forms, wolves, bears, or worse, desperate men. For a tense moment, he half expected the latch to rattle, for something to force its way in. But after a long pause, the growl faded. The dog returned to her pups, curling around them like a shield. Still, sleep did not come easily. The man lay awake in his cot, staring at the flickering shadows on the ceiling. Every howl of wind, every creak of the timbers kept him on edge. And yet, amidst the unease, there was something else, something new. The sound of steady breathing filled the cabin, no longer just his own. It was strangely comforting, though it carried weight. For the first time in years, he wasn't truly alone. But whether that was a blessing or a curse, only time would tell. Morning arrived quietly, the storm easing at last. Pale sunlight filtered through the frost-coated window, casting long beams across the cabin floor. The man stirred from his cot, stiff from a restless night, and the first thing he saw was movement near the hearth. The puppies, full of renewed energy, were tumbling over each other in a clumsy game, their tiny tails wagging, their paws sliding across the wood. For the first time in months, the sound of laughter echoed inside the cabin. Not his, but the innocent yips and squeals of young life. The German shepherd sat nearby, watching her pups with calm, steady eyes. When the man rose, she tensed for an instant, her ears flicking back, but she did not growl. Instead, she tilted her head as though measuring his intentions. He crouched slowly, extending his hand. The shepherd hesitated, then allowed him to come closer. Her breath fogged the cold air between them, her eyes unblinking. When she finally lowered her head, allowing his hand to brush gently against her fur, a weight lifted from his chest. It wasn't trust, at least not yet, but it was a beginning. The man fetched a piece of dried meat and placed it on the floor. One of the puppies bounded forward eagerly, devouring it with squeaky determination. The other wobbled after, tripping over its own paws. The shepherd watched closely, but she didn't interfere. Instead, she looked at the man, her gaze softening in a way that felt almost like gratitude. He caught himself smiling, a rare warmth breaking through the hardened lines of his face. As the day passed, the cabin no longer felt empty. The fire burned bright, but the true warmth came from the life moving within its walls. The man found himself talking softly, not full conversations, but words he hadn't spoken aloud in years. And though the dogs couldn't answer, their presence was enough. Something inside him shifted. He had let them in out of pity. But now, for the first time in a long while, he wondered if maybe they had come for him too. That night, the cabin was quieter. The puppies, exhausted from their playful bursts, curled tightly near the fire, their small bodies rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The man sat at the table carving a piece of wood absent-mindedly, his eyes drifting often to the German shepherd. She lay stretched out on the floor, but her ears twitched with every sound, her muscles taut even in rest. Unlike the pups, she did not relax, not fully. As the hours wore on, her restlessness grew. She rose, pacing back and forth near the door, her claws tapping against the boards. Every few minutes, she stopped, staring intently at the man, then back at the door. It was as though she was asking him to follow. He frowned, unease stirring in his gut. He had lived in the wild long enough to know when an animal was trying to communicate. But what was she trying to show him? The storm had eased, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Outside, the moonlight glimmered on endless snow, casting long shadows across the trees. The shepherd pressed her nose to the crack beneath the door, then let out a soft but urgent whine. The man stiffened. Something was out there, something she wanted him to see. He reached instinctively for his rifle, his survival instinct roaring to life. Yet the dog's gaze stopped him. Her eyes weren't filled with fear, but determination. He hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. Why lead him into the cold after she had fought so desperately to come in? Unless whatever waited outside was the real reason she had come. The thought unsettled him. She hadn't just begged for shelter. She was here with a purpose. The shepherd pawed at the door again, her body trembling with urgency. The man's pulse quickened. He glanced once at the sleeping pups, then back at their mother, who stared at him with unrelenting intensity. Finally, he rose from his chair, his decision heavy as the snow outside. With each step toward the door, he knew he was crossing into something larger than himself. The man pulled on his heavy coat, boots crunching against the wooden floor as he prepared for the bitter cold. The shepherd stood by the door, her body tense, tail stiff, eyes glowing with determination. She gave a sharp whine, pacing in tight circles until he lifted the latch. The door creaked open, and an icy gust swept in, stinging his face. For a moment he almost changed his mind. But then he saw the dog step out into the snow without hesitation, glancing back once to make sure he was following. Against every instinct screaming at him to stay inside, he gritted his teeth and trudged into the night. The snow crunched beneath their feet as they moved deeper into the forest. The air was painfully still, the kind of silence that swallowed every sound. The moon cast a pale silver glow over the land, revealing nothing but endless drifts and jagged trees. Yet the shepherd pressed on, moving with purpose, pausing only to check if the man kept pace. Each step pulled him farther from the warmth of his cabin, farther into the unknown. His breath fogged before him, and sweat chilled instantly against his skin. After what felt like an eternity, the shepherd suddenly stopped. Her ears perked, and she trotted toward a mound half buried in snow near the edge of a thicket. The man's chest tightened as he drew closer. At first it looked like nothing, just drifted snow. But then he saw it. A dark shape, still and silent. Dropping to one knee, he brushed the snow aside, his heart lurching when his hand struck something solid. It was a body. The shepherd whined urgently, circling the mound. The man worked quickly, clearing the snow to reveal a person, motionless, skin pale as ice, lips cracked and blue. A faint rise and fall of the chest told him they were still alive, but barely. His heart pounded. Whoever this was, they had been lying here waiting for death, until the shepherd led him straight to them. He looked at the dog, stunned. She hadn't been asking for help. She had been leading him to save a life. For a moment, the man could only stare at the still figure buried in the snow. His pulse hammered in his ears, and the cold bit cruelly into his face, urging him to act. The German shepherd barked sharply, circling the body with urgency, as if demanding he move faster. Snapping out of his shock, the man dropped to his knees, brushing snow away from the stranger's frozen clothes. Their skin was ghostly pale, their breath shallow, each one a fragile whisper against the silence of the night. Time was running out. With trembling hands, he gripped the person under the arms and tried to lift. The cold had stiffened their body, and his own strength faltered under the weight. He grunted, planting his boots deeper into the snow, hauling inch by inch. The shepherd pressed against him, nudging and whining, as if to lend her strength. His breath came in ragged bursts, his muscles screaming, but he refused to stop. Not now, not after coming this far. The storm swirled harder, snowflakes stinging his eyes as he staggered back toward the cabin. Every step felt heavier than the last, his boots sinking deep into the drifts. He slipped once, nearly falling, the body dragging him down. But the shepherd darted ahead, barking, guiding him through the darkness. The puppy's faint cries echoed from the cabin, distant yet pulling him forward like a beacon. At last, the cabin's dim glow appeared through the trees. Summoning the last of his strength, he shoved the door open with his shoulder, collapsing inside with the unconscious figure in his arms. The warmth of the fire washed over them, a lifeline against the bitter frost. He lowered the stranger onto a rug near the hearth, his chest heaving, every muscle burning with exhaustion. The shepherd settled beside the body, her nose pressing gently against their cheek. For the first time since she arrived, her eyes softened with relief. The man realized with a rush of awe that this dog had never begged for herself. She had been begging for them. And in saving a stranger, she had saved him too. The cabin glowed with warmth, the fire crackling brighter than ever. The stranger lay wrapped in blankets near the hearth, their shallow breaths slowly evening out, color returning faintly to their cheeks. The man sat nearby, exhaustion etched across his face, but relief warming his chest. He had done it, against the storm, against doubt, against fear. They were alive because he had listened to the dog who refused to be ignored. The German shepherd lay close, her head resting protectively near the stranger's side. Her eyes no longer carried desperation, but quiet triumph. The puppies, curled against their mother, twitched in their sleep, blissfully unaware of the miracle that had unfolded. The man studied them all, a lump rising in his throat. What had begun as a choice between survival and compassion had become something much greater. For the first time in years, he felt his solitude cracking apart. The silence that had once weighed on him now seemed like a memory. His cabin was alive, with warmth, with purpose, with companionship. He looked around at the humble space, suddenly seeing it differently. This wasn't just his shelter anymore, it was theirs. And in that shared space, he was no longer just a man surviving winter, he was part of something worth surviving for. The stranger stirred faintly, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. He leaned closer, catching only fragments, but the gratitude was clear. His gaze shifted to the shepherd once more. She met his eyes steadily, her tail thumping softly against the floor. No words were needed. Her message was already written in the life she had saved and the trust she had given. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, a new beginning had taken root. A bond forged not by chance, but by courage, sacrifice, and trust. The man had opened his door, and in doing so, he had opened his life. And on that frozen night at -30, what seemed like a burden became a blessing, one that would change everything forever.